Soulforce
Revolution.
Hare Krishna, welcome, Sitapati Das and Danna Devi. Danna pronounced. Thank you for coming on the show. We're going to talk about a few topics related to the changes of the books and the Parampara system that Prabhupada set up. And I think I'll just ask you, the first question is when do you first start thinking about the change to the books, and when you started kind of debating or discussing that issue?
Yeah, so thank you, Prabhu. I was on the internet from like 1994, and I got Bhagavad Gita as it is in 1996 during the Prabhupada Centennial Marathon. And I would say that I joined ISKCON, Srila Prabhupada's movement, in 1997. And, in that first year, 97, 98, I just read everything that was available on the internet at the time about ISKCON, Krishna consciousness, so I read Monkey on a Stick.
Mm-hmm.
I saw that there was this thing called the Final Order, and I think I looked at it at the time, but I couldn't tell you now in 2025 even what the table of contents of it is. And book changes was another one, and then the poison hypothesis. Those were the kind of the three main controversial kind of topics. Oh, and the child abuse. So those were the three main things. And in the beginning, people would say like, "Oh, did you know about this? Or had you heard about this?" I'm like, dude, I've read literally everything on the internet. Because at that time, it was possible. When I first got on the internet in 1994, it was possible to read pretty much everything on the internet.
Wow, even that early, 94.
Yeah.
Wow.
I've been a software developer,
Yeah.
for my whole professional life. And I started programming when I was 10 in the 80s. So I've been a real early adopter. So I looked at it back then, but didn't pay much attention to it other than to know that such a thing existed as a controversial issue. I really started looking at it in detail last year, 2024, or maybe 23. It was post the 2022 Wellington Parliament protest in New Zealand, where we went and did a Sankirtan Yagya there for 3 weeks, which is where Danna Devi and I met. And one thing I noticed there was we tried to get books to distribute in the occupation. We did 3,000 plates. When I say we, I'm like including myself with the devotees who came and empowered this, and speaking on their behalf. So we distributed 3,000 plates of prasadam. Abhay Charan Prabhu was cooking in the kitchen there every day.
Bodhi as well.
Bodhi Manta Prabhu. And we couldn't get any books to distribute there. No ISKCON center that we reached out to would supply us with books. And Bodhi Manta Prabhu came, and he brought a whole lot of books with him. And they were all first edition original books. And I saw them there and I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. They're pretty retro looking, like old school. And then I also contacted a friend, a devotee friend, a god brother who works or manages the BBT in another country. And he airlifted, a pallet of books to us, but they arrived after the occupation finished. So our son Prahlad was distributing books there every day, and they were these original books. And then after the occupation finished, we got married. I was just thinking and looking, and I thought there's like a cluster of ideas or positions that devotees who supported the chanting of the holy name in any and all circumstances, including in a parliament protest, they all seem to share these things in common. I went on Nam Rasa's podcast in 2021 and I said, why I decided that ISKCON taking a position on vaccination is a philosophical deviation. Now, of course, people say ISKCON didn't take a position, but we can't deny that several leading ISKCON gurus and senior devotees, speaking from their position of authority and credibility in the society, released templated endorsements of an experimental medical procedure. And at the time, I was like, what is this? This is not repeating the message of the Bhagavad. This is speaking in parampara, but not in parampara from Srila Prabhupada. And at the same time, I wrote a counterpoint, vaccinate yourself with bhakti. And, I submitted it to iskonnews.com, dandavats.com, and the only website that published it was the Sampradaya Sun. Kind of ironic because I actually started iskonnews.com back in the day.
Oh, you started that?
I started that, yeah.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And then, I don't know what it is now, maybe 20 years later or so, or 18 or whatever it is, now they won't publish my...
And you won't
my
push it.
Yeah. So afterwards, Muchakunda Das, who was there in the Parliament protest, he got married to his wife, Ishri Keshavi Devi Dasi. And my wife and I went and we performed the Vedic marriage ceremony for them up in Whangarei, which is where Bodhimanta Prabhu has his center. And I met Daneshwara Maharaj there. And I didn't really know much about him, but he was there. He's a sannyasi. He's a brahmana. And so I was engaged with things, but I asked my wife, go and speak to him and buy a copy of his books from him. So we can support him and we can find out about it. So I got this book here, which is called Divine or Demoniac, Spiritual Movements and the Enemies Within.
Wow.
And it's really a conspiracy theory. It covers several things, child abuse, changes to the books, the poisoning of Srila Prabhupada hypothesis. And so as I read through this book, I got to this part where he's talking about changes to the books. And I thought, well, it's interesting that the devotees who supported the chanting of the holy name in any and all circumstances also have this position where they're like the original books, not the edited ones. And I thought that's an interesting data point. Let me look into this issue of the changes to the books. And so what we did is we were doing a daily Bhagavad Gita class, reading through the Bhagavad Gita as it is, Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita as it is, streaming it online. It's on YouTube. So we started examining the original manuscripts that Srila Prabhupada had typed, and then examining the first edition, the authorized edition of Bhagavad Gita as it is, and then the so-called second edition of the Bhagavad Gita, the edited books, and the justifications for the edits, like line by line, verse by verse, purport by purport, examining every single change. And we did that from the first chapter of the Bhagavad Gita up until the sixth chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. From the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita as it is, there are not original manuscripts from Srila Prabhupada available. At that point, they switched to typed transcripts of his dictation. And even for the sixth chapter of Bhagavad Gita as it is, the manuscript that we have seems to have been edited after the dictation was made. But that was enough for me to get not just a sense, but an in-depth analysis of the changes that have been made to Bhagavad Gita as it is in the first 6 chapters, and also to reverse engineer the editing theory that's being used. Because if you look into it, the official justification is that this is closer to Prabhupada. It's about fixing mistakes that are in there. I'm reading through Bhagavad Gita as it is, first edition, authorized edition at the moment, with a friend. And as I read through, I can see the differences from the first and second edition. And I can also see mistakes that are in here. Just last night I was reading, I think 231, and it says on the battle rather than on the battlefield. I'm like, okay, this looks like it was meant to be on the battlefield, but it says on the battle. So there are those kind of changes, which no one would refute or dispute or have any issue with. They're kind of like, okay, those things make sense. And so when you examine the official story for it, those are the ones that are presented. You don't disagree with this, do you, Prabhu? Changing, fixing on the battle to on the battlefield. And then there are things like paragraphs that got dropped out. There are things like a typist has gone to the end of one line and skipped the next line and then started from the line after that. So those are the kind of, changes that will always be produced as the justifications for making the edits. But there are other edits in there that are never the ones that are disclosed, never the ones that you're pointed to or are, hey, look, here's this edit and why we did it. But as you go through, you find out that not only are there these kind of, I would call them non-controversial edits, or, like edits that everyone can agree on and the ones that are presented as the reasoning for it, but there are other edits in there as well. And when you reverse engineer the actual editing theory that informs the editing that's taken place, it is not closer to Prabhupada, although some of the edits are. And the most egregious one for me is the change to the title of chapter 6 of Bhagavad Gita as it is, which Srila Prabhupada unequivocally, unambiguously titled Sankhya Yoga. And he referred to it on multiple occasions from 1966, I believe, up until 1972 in public lectures. Sankhya Yoga. And the justification for changing the name of the chapter is that Prabhupada, I'm paraphrasing here, but Prabhupada got it wrong. And, Bhagavad Gita does not have canonical chapter titles. There's no Sanskrit text that is translated as this is the title of the chapter. So the choice of the title of the chapter of his commentary, his Bhagavad Gita Bhashya, Bhagavad Gita as it is, it's an authorial choice, just like the title of the book or the color of the cover. It's a choice of the author. It's a personal expression, personal realization, personal choice. He definitely called it Sankhya Yoga, and then it was pronounced as this is the wrong title. It's like changing the name of a title of a chapter in Lord of the Rings. There is no correct answer to that question. But then the title has been renamed in the second edition to Dhyana Yoga. I also found examples of things as I examined it. I have various copies of Bhagavad Gita as it is, second edition, printed at different times. And it turns out that there is no stable second edition. That even between these two books here, which both say they are the second edition, they contain different contents. So depending on which edition you're reading, you'll have something different inside it. And there are changes that have been made and then reverted. So the second edition is not a stable text. And it also is informed by an editing theory that is not what you're told it is, that it is closer to Prabhupada. The parts that they will show you are closer to Prabhupada. The parts that they don't show you are not closer to Prabhupada. So there's a fundamental deception or dishonesty in what's being presented about what's being done. And that is not the speaking of a Brahmana. It is not satyam. It's not straightforward Brahminical speaking. So the editing is being done, leaving aside, the general categorical thing of should any editing be done. One thing I can say definitively about it is that it is a lie, what is being done.
Nice, thank you. That was a lot to unpack there. Is it really good answer? Yeah, and it touches on a lot of the other things I'd like to ask about. I was just going to mention also, I think, like COVID for me was also like a real tipping point in sort of the faith in ISKCON or the certain gurus. Like even my Diksha guru, I remember him sort of saying, calling us conspiracy theorists, people that question. And I was just like facepalm. I was just like, that's ridiculous. Like, as we know, COVID, I kind of smelled a rat from the beginning. I have a friend who's not a devotee, but he's kind of pretty switched on. He's spiritual, sort of anarchist kind of guy. And as soon as it started, my partner at the time came home and said, "Oh, I must wash your hands really well. Must wash your hands." And I was like, what's this drama all about? And then he was telling me from the get-go, you and me know governments, don't take this with a large pinch of salt. And then Bharat, the devotee who's on the New Govardhan farm, he sent me a link to a documentary. I forgot what it's called now, but of the pandemic, I think. But there's a lot of documentaries, but a pretty early one was just sort of showing how this whole thing was kind of orchestrated, and it showed like, was that event 201, that thing where they had like a 5 hour kind of like preparation for a possible pandemic, 6 months before it. You got Bill Gates, funding and all that. And so it seemed pretty obvious that the whole thing had been kind of orchestrated, and it wasn't just suddenly surprise kind of thing. So yeah, I was onto it from the beginning. I was working at home at the time and I had a lot of time free, and I'd go out in lunchtime. I actually went on the early protests and I made a sign, I painted a sign up. I think it said COVID 1984, pandemic, and then it said something like chemtrails, 5G, and vaccines are all poison. And so I took that on the protest, and I saw the police smash this guy's head into the concrete at the protest. And I was shouting at them, you're going to get your karma for this. And then there was an Aboriginal lady. They couldn't really do anything to her. They couldn't. She was following her the whole time, the cops the whole time, saying, you dogs. And they couldn't really respond because, an Aboriginal woman, it would look terrible if they'd kind of responded or done anything with her. So anyway, and then that sign I later put in front of my house, and then some people were quite favourable. Some people would even knock on the door saying, yeah, right on. And then some people were like, oh, what's this? You're crazy. Eventually someone stole that sign and probably trashed it. But anyway, I found at the time, ISKCON, it really put me off the fact that, a lot of it seemed to be, I was debating with a lot of people online. Some people were on board, and then some people were towing the line. And then at that point where Prabhupada and Swami had written, a thing basically sort of saying how these vaccines, because he was the health minister. And then I think they removed him from his post. And that for me was like you were saying, ISKCON, maybe ISKCON didn't as a whole have a policy exactly, but generally speaking, I mean, when they did things like that, it seemed like the powers that be, the GBC or whatever, when they removed him from doing that, and no one else really officially spoke about it. There may have been people like me and you on the sort of fringe of it. But yeah, by and large, the mainstream of ISKCON were towing the line, weren't they? And you couldn't go to the temple. Rupert told me that, he gave him a lot of drama, and also the temple wouldn't let him in. You've got to wear a mask, can't do this, can't do that. And so, of course, maybe they had to toe the line in terms of the law, but they certainly didn't have any opposition. And to me, this movement that Lord Chaitanya started, I was inspired by it because it was a revolutionary movement. It's like what happened between then and now, or even what Prabhupada did was so revolutionary. He wouldn't back down on these sort of things. And it seems like we've become so complacent now, unfortunately, by and large. And yeah, what you guys did also, I was thinking that's exactly what we should be doing. Go to the protests, with the holy name, with the books, with the prashad. And now I would have been totally on board with that. Now there was none of that incident. It was like me, going to these protests with, a handful of other people, not even devotees. But I mean, it's possible we could have organized that, but that's the sort of thing it seems like we should have been doing. And then when I heard that, you guys were not sort of, by your Diksha Guru saying, you shouldn't be doing that. The fact that you guys all sort of defied that was very inspiring for me. Because who are these people to say, you shouldn't do, any circumstance really which is favorable to, any circumstance, favorable, not unfavorable. Lord Chaitanya didn't discriminate, did he? He just spread the holy name, anywhere. And these places are more favorable. People are already a little bit switched on what's going on in the world. They're probably much more favorable to hearing the kind of message that we've got on the alternative than the mainstream. So I thought it was great how that happened there. And it seemed to be a division between people like us who are kind of this sort of generation would tend to be a bit more radical, and then the older generation or the gurus or GBC or they seem to be sitting on the laurels. They seem to be sort of in a bit of a comfort zone, and don't rock the boat. Maybe it's don't rock the boat, because that's going to jeopardize my kind of position. Maybe something like that, rather than sort of no, we should rock the boat. We should be radical. We should be revolutionary. Prabhupada would talk about the moon landing. But you'll see a lot of things on my channel about, say, I made a video about the fake moon landing, and Prabhupada was kind of the first person to call that out. So I got Uttama Shloka kind of narrated that for me. So I've done a lot of that on the channel, but I kind of like that. I like the way the Prabhupada said, "Oh yeah, no, we didn't go to the moon," and like, even devotees left at that time, but he didn't really back down, or apparently he didn't go too much into that topic. He sort of said, some of you can like delve into the cosmology. It's not really his field of expertise, he would sort of humbly say. But yeah, I like that. I really like that about Prabhupada, like the controversy. He didn't really back down from controversy. And yeah, but it seems like, what do you think the reason for the book changes? My idea is, I think it seems like they want to water down the philosophy, maybe to sell more books to make more money, or what do you think the reasons are? Or do you think it's just ego? I know better than my guru. I'll go in and edit my guru's books and improve them. What do you think?
Well, just before I answer that question, thank you for sharing your experience of the pandemic. There's one thing I'll say about that is, in your presentation of it, there were a few kind of key words that jumped out at me, like radical, revolutionary, defy the order. To me, it's not, none of that was really a thing. For me, it was just simply being faithful and just continuing to do the same thing that I've always done. There's a war breaking out in the Middle East right now. They're after some more weapons of mass destruction, apparently. In 2003, when the first, the Iraq war, to get the weapons of mass destruction happened, there were over 1 million people protesting around the world. Some of the largest protests in modern history up to that time. And I went on a Harinam in a big protest in Lima, Peru, where I was living at the time, alongside the temple president, Kanu Pandit. I remember we had to walk for hours to go to the American embassy with this huge protest, and we just did Harinam the whole way there. And I remember thinking, like, we got to get back to the temple after this. So when people started saying things like, we don't do Harinam in protests, I was just like, what are you talking about? I wrote about my pastimes and experiences in South America. I was reading it a while ago, and there was several times I was doing Harinam and tear gas in protest. One time, someone fired a shotgun right next to me in a protest in Ecuador.
Wow.
And we crossed over like the police lines into the protesters, and they're all got like, their t-shirts wrapped around their heads to hide their identity and maybe to help with the tear gas. So this idea that we don't do Harinam and protests, I was like, this is a new idea, and I'm just sticking with the old one. I'm just going to keep doing what I've been doing for decades, and I'm going to chant the holy name in any and all circumstances. It's not defiance, it's not being radical, it's not being revolutionary. If anything, it was a conservative position to take. I'm just going to do the same thing we've always done. We go where the people are, we chant the holy name, and we distribute prasadam, and we distribute Srila Prabhupada's books.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was what it was for me.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah. I wasn't saying like radical in terms of going against what we've been doing, but I suppose in terms of, that is radical in itself, like what Lord Chaitanya, what Prabhupada did was sort of radical against like the mainstream sort of society of just consumerism and materialism. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
it's not even really that. It's like, we are not against the asuras. The asuras are those who are against the Lord, and we are the servants of the Lord. And so when they position themselves against Lord Vishnu, we find them positioned against us. We're not taking a contrary position against anyone. We are for Lord Vishnu and for his servants. We're Vaishnavas. And when the world turns against God, we will find ourselves facing them, and we will not turn with them. We stay true to the parampara, to the instructions that we have from the acharyas, and we just keep going forward. Param Vijayate Shri Krishna Sankirtanam, total world victory of Hare Krishna.
One thing I wanted to add there, Prabhu, is I don't think we have, I can speak for my husband for a short time. I don't think we are against authority. In my personal observation and view, it's if there is abuse of power, if there is misleading of a leader to the people, then we have to say it aloud. That's not okay. Just because a person is in the leadership position, it doesn't mean the person is right or correct. Because he's not the omnipotent, omniscient God. It's just a human being with a title of a leadership. And, you know, there were other religious groups there that I feel like, wow, how come these religious groups are way here, like in the protest, than the Hare Krishnas chanting and relieving their pain and anguish of people? Because in the scripture says the holy names are so powerful. It eradicates anything. Do you believe what you're reading or you just don't? It's two things. And for these leaders, ISKCON leaders, to come up and say, you don't do this. I get it. Okay, you may be scared that, you know, you are going to have a bad name by the governments, but we got to be straight up. God gave a free will to a person, and everyone can decide what they need to do, what they have to do. I don't need a third person to come to me as like, oh, you have to get the shots. It's safe and effective. Guess what? It's not proven that it's safe and effective. Hey, I have an intelligence to view this. And yeah, so another thing I wanted to add was about the 311, the article 311 about
GBC resolution 311,
yes,
2008 GBC resolution 311 to annotate Srila Prabhupada's books. You want to say something about that?
No, you go.
Me? Okay. So, yeah. In terms of the book changes, in 2008, I was reading the GBC resolutions, and they had released GBC resolution 311, directing the BBT to annotate Srila Prabhupada's books. And they said, whereas, you know, some of the Prabhupada's statements have been taken out of context and used harmfully against people, particularly Srila Prabhupada's purport in the 4th canto, which includes the word rape. You know, the GBC directs the BBT to annotate the books and create annotations for them. Like you pointed to it earlier, you know, we could put a footnote in there explaining something if it's not clear. Now, of course, the question then becomes like, who gets to say what's clear and not clear? And then who gets to say, you know, what Prabhupada really meant? Yeah. So I wrote an article. I had a couple of devotees who helped me to do that. One of them was Chaitanya Dev Das, who passed away this year. I miss him dearly. But we wrote that article, and it's published on ISKCONnews.com, and it's still on there today. And in 2020, I was speaking with my guru, and he said, are you the Sitapati who wrote the article about the GBC, the annotations? And I said, yes. And he said, oh, because they're, you know, pushing for it again in Mayapur in meetings, and opponents of annotating Srila Prabhupada's books brought your article and the arguments from your article against it. And some of the arguments I made in there were the ones that I just made. Who gets to say what's not clear? Who gets to say what it really means? And then the other thing is that the GBC has recanted for positions in the past. It's not an infallible body. You know, things like the zonal acharya system, for example, would be an obvious one. What happens if the person who writes the annotations later on becomes seriously deviant? Like there's ISKCON initiating gurus who have become avowed atheists, denouncing the movement. There's one quite famous recently. He's, you know, published articles saying, I'm an atheist, and this is the one true way. Harikesh Swami fell down shortly after I joined ISKCON, and I had his book on social issues, and so I gave the example and an illustration in the article against the annotations. You know, when someone falls down, we take his books off this shelf and we put them on this other shelf over here, you know, like the Shastra of the fallen acharyas. What happens if that person has written something inside Prabhupada's book? What are we supposed to do about that? And so I said the GBC has dangerously overstepped its mandate by making this resolution. It doesn't even show that they have considered these kind of issues in saying this. They just throw this out there. Hey, just do this without considering the implications. Someone who makes a resolution like that without even showing that they have examined these kind of aspects is not someone who is at all qualified to be making these kind of decisions. The way this resolution has been made is itself a disqualification. And if there's one thing that we can all agree on in ISKCON, it's Srila Prabhupada's books. There are many different takes on what they mean or how to interpret them or how to understand them or how to present them to the public. But at least we live in a house that Prabhupada built that we can all live in and might have many different rooms in it. But the structure of the house is Srila Prabhupada's instructions and his teaching. And now you want to mess with that? Like, the book changes, as I look into it now, has been a long-running controversy that's created a significant schism in the movement. It's a constant point of controversy. Why would you seek to alienate members of the movement by doing like more of that, by annotating these books in this way? So, you know, that was the central thrust of the argument that I made in there. It's like, from a strategic leadership move, it's just really the wrong kind of move to make. It guarantees another civil war within ISKCON, were they to do it. That's just as a Kshatriya, but as a Brahmana, the other points that I raised as well. So I gave both the consideration as a Kshatriya and the consideration as a Brahmana.
And I also have because Prabhu, you mentioned you asked the question, why do you think they did this, or something along the lines? You know, could be they want to make more money and all of that. Of course, if you think through that angle, I would say, why are you finding a new edition of the second edition? Because you want to make money and people want to buy more books. Oh, this edition is way better than the other, and we don't want to miss the new, you know, the new meaning. Could be. Or could be another way in the long term, because what I think is this is not a short-term thing to destroy the mission of Srila Prabhupada. It's been going since the time he left, maybe even when he was present. They started to rebel, and, you know, and along the lines, they are diminishing and diminishing and diminishing and diminishing. So there's a long-term project here. This is what I think. This is what I observe. To the point where they are going to write their own Bhagavad Gita, but where Srila Prabhupada is just, like you read it, if you can read it on the online there, it's a employee, higher employee, right? Okay, so there's one thing. And the other thing is, oh, he's a conditioned soul. The other thing is, oh, he was a confused person, maybe all of that. So if you start looking at it, is why are they doing that? They have a mission here. And who are these people that have a mission in here? Are the ones that are in the GBC that Srila Prabhupada created, and are the ones that are having a lot of influence in people, and people don't see it so far. Some of them see, some of them don't.
Just one thing I'll say about that. We have like 1 minute left in this.
I was going to send you another link. Yeah, because I've only got the account.
We'll keep going. But I'll just say one thing about that. Not everyone in the GBC, but there are significant and influential people in various positions of power, you know, taking active steps towards this. And yeah, I'd like to speak to that point also about motivation. But let's do to your question about motivation, like why are they doing this? So I avoid treating conjecture about motivation as authoritative praman. And I do that to avoid the fallacy of what I call refutation by psychoanalysis. You know, people will say like, well, you know, the reason why Sitapati was in that protest is because he, you know, has issues with authority, and, He has issues with his father and father figures. And so, they'll go to a whole world of psychoanalysis, but nowhere are we instructed to do that. We're instructed to chant the holy name and kirtaniya sadahari, nasmarane nakalaha. Nayamita nasmarane nakalaha. There are no rules, no regulations, no time, no place. It's not one of the auspicious ritualistic activities offered in the Vedas as fruitive activities, and it's an offense to consider it as one. Those karmakanda activities, if you perform them at the wrong time or the wrong place, they produce inauspicious results. Shreya Kaivara Chandrika Vitaranam Vidyuvada Jivanam. It is all auspicious, the chanting of the holy name, always, in all circumstances. So I keep myself, as much as I possibly can, grounded in the Shabda Brahman of Krishna consciousness. Now, as a Kshatriya, I'm also responsible for analyzing strategy and tactics and consequences, but I also have to remain aligned and consistent with dharma. So when I can't perform some adharmic activity in the name of producing like a favorable result. So what I do, rather than speculate about people's motivations, I might look to something like the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which says that the asuras are envious of the super soul within their bodies and within the body of others. They are dedicated to performing unbeneficial, horrible works to destroy the world. They say that Anishwaram, they say that the Jagarahur Anishwaram, the world is unreal with no one in charge, and so therefore, Ishwaraham Aham Bhogi, I am the controller, I am the enjoyer. It seems to me that as I draw a picture of the adversary, if you like, by analyzing the characteristics and, like I said before, reverse engineering the editing theory, the philosophy that actually underlies the concrete edits rather than simply the propaganda that's expressed about it, to understand like what is actually driving this. And I can conjecture about where it's driving to. One thing I'll say about the book editing is that once you introduce this process and accept this process the way it has been done, you have created the ability to mutate Srila Prabhupada's teachings over time to be basically whatever the person who has control of the process wants them to be. There's a categorical shift from keep it the way that Srila Prabhupada left it and authorized it to make any kind of change to it at all. That's a categorical shift. Once you make the categorical shift, any further shifts are a matter of degree. Who gets to say, and who gets to say what it is, and what do they get to change it to? Once you accept the categorical shift, the shift by degrees, just like during the pandemic, the government created new laws that said that, police and health officials can now go into your house without a court warrant in order to enforce these new regulations that we've produced. And at the time, I made the critique of that even if we posit that the government is purely beneficial and has our best interests in heart, anyone with any kind of tactical brain will understand that, oh yes, we are the good guys, but we're going to create a power now that when the next government gets in and they're the bad guys, they can immediately use to the detriment of the population. So therefore, we should not create such a power because it will be misused in the future. And the fact that they didn't show any kind of awareness of that is an indication that they're either massively incompetent or maliciously motivated. And those two are at such a level, like the level of incompetence that you would create a nuclear weapon and just like drop it on the ground. That you're that incompetent. There's a saying that says, never ascribe to malice that which can be described or explained by incompetence. But there's a level of incompetence that's so high that it becomes functionally indistinguishable from malice. It doesn't matter whether the people who are doing it are incompetent or whether they're actually malicious. The functional effect of it over time is indistinguishable. So it matters not what their motivations are, because the consequences will be the same. even if they are not malicious themselves, they're so incompetent that they just created a deadly system that will 100% be utilized by extremely intelligent and extremely ill-motivated entities. Human beings, the body that we have to do our service in this lifetime, is not the most intelligent or sophisticated life form on this planet in operation right now. There are life forms, other bodies on this planet that we cannot distinguish using the eyeballs of the human body from other people and actors around us that have levels of intelligence way beyond us. You know, in Dhruva Maharaja's battle with the Yakshas, they cast illusions to try and throw him off his game. You know, they created illusions of blood raining down from the sky, past stool, like trees, all kinds of things raining down to try to get him to stop doing what he was doing. But his name is Dhruva, which means fixed. Fixed determination, one-pointed determination. He did not deviate from what he was doing, even when they threw all that up in front of him. What happened during the pandemic is a whole illusory yaksha spell was cast. And the test of the whole thing was, will you remain fixed in dharma? Will you remain faithful to the parampara and the instructions of the acharyas and having complete faith in the chanting of the holy name after having heard so many instructions on this matter? Or will you deviate from that point? So the motivations of these people, they can be understood by studying very carefully the 16th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. There are two types of created beings, the devas and the asuras, and their characteristics, their qualities, their motivations, their actions, and the consequences of their actions are laid out in the 16th chapter. And, you know, when the pandemic happened and, you know, these ISKCON leaders came out reproducing the Shabda and Parampara from Fauci and Gates and the World Health Organization and not speaking in Parampara from Sri Krishna and Srila Prabhupada, I went on Namras's podcast and said, I am not hearing the message of the Bhagavat being spoken here. I do not hear them saying that the conditioned living entities have 4 defects. They have a tendency to make mistakes, imperfect senses. They have a tendency to be illusioned, and then they have a cheating propensity, vipralipsia. They have all of these defects. And so the Shabda, the materially conditioned speaking in disciplic succession of the materially conditioned souls is not a reliable source of truth. To say they didn't need to defy anything, they didn't need to oppose anything. All they needed to do was faithfully reproduce the Shabda in Parampara from the Acharyas. There are 2 types of created beings. There are those who say that there is no God in control. Anishram, Jagadahur Anishwaram. So if we are listening to people who explicitly say there is no God, that we will control the world, we're going to dim the sun, we're going to modify the living organisms to make them better because God got it wrong, and then we're going to reproduce their Shabda, and we're not going to say that there are 2 types of living beings. Krishna has told us, the Devas and the Asuras, these are the qualities of the Devas, these are the qualities of the Asuras. These are the 4 defects of the conditioned soul. The holy name alone can render all benediction to all living beings, and it is the prime activity of this age. That is what we needed to be saying at that time, and that was not said. This is the characteristic of the Maya Prita Gyan, which means their intelligence has been stolen by illusion, and the Asuram Bhavam Ashritya, those who have taken shelter of the nature of the Asuras. They can be understood by their qualities and their activities, their guna and their karma. So when you ask me, like, what's their motivation? Why are they doing it? I go to the philosophy rather than speculation about psychology or any kinds of explanations like that. I simply ground myself in the transcendental Shabda of Sri Krishna and Srila Prabhupada.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, I like that first word. Brahma, Pramada, Vipralipsa, Karanapatava. Yeah, like every conditioned soul has those defects. So anyone who's got those defects is not, you can't produce anything worth listening to. And so, like what you were saying before, Danna Mataji, was some people might consider Prabhupada to be a conditioned soul or have some kind of defect, or like as soon as we doubt Srila Prabhupada as just being a conditioned soul, it almost like renders everything useless, or it renders everything he said like subject to like change, and oh no, he got it wrong, and we know better. So yeah, like you say, whatever the motivation is, it doesn't really matter, because if the result is the same, that we feel like we can change his teachings, change the parampara, the system he's set up, and put ourselves on the kind of the post. Like also, Mataji, that was a very good point you were making, that there's been a systematic sort of destruction of ISKCON from within, as Prabhupada said. Even in his time, like he made that famous quote, that the sinister movement is within our movement, things like that. Referring, I guess, to whatever people want to think it is, but like the Illuminati, secret societies, or what, it doesn't really matter what you call it, but definitely like it seems to be infiltrated and tried to be destroyed from within. And whether that's someone coming in purposely doing it, which I think is also there. And I think there's also just a personal motivation. Like, you've got those original, say, 11 people who wanted to be, end up the zonal chariots. It's like every one of them wanted a piece of the pie. And some wanted to be, like Kirtananda, he literally wanted to be the next in charge, and he'd already taken Prabhupada's Gita manuscript and put his own name on it, even in Prabhupada's time. And so it seemed like there was definitely a scramble for power. And there wasn't even 11. I think there was a certain number of names that were listed. And then Tamal actually changed it. And if you notice, like, they always do things by dates, just like 9/11, like 9 and 11. These are like important numbers for, they quite often have these numbers. For example, like now you've got the king's birthday, but it's on the same day as the queen's birthday. That's a coincidence. It can't be his birthday. But they choose these days and these dates. So, because there's certain power, the Asuras know these sort of powers, and it comes back to what you said a little bit about karma kanda. You can do all these rituals and all these sort of things for material gain, and the powers that be know they do these things, they orchestrate these things. So I think personally, well, a lot of people seem to think that Tamal was kind of quite a key person, because first of all they make the 11, and like Bhavananda was also kind of very much a sidekick. And these are the people that are really changing things. Like Prabhupada said, I don't want to name too many names here, but Prabhupada said once about Hare Krishna that, like, he said that, I've observed this person, and he's not a Vaishnava. Like, he's basically all about self-aggrandizement. I used to see them. I went to London with Dr. Simon, who's from London, and we went to the Manor, and it was the 30th anniversary, and they had all the original couples were there that set it up. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj was there, and I remember looking at the time and still looking up to him, thinking this personality is very, very unique. And I used to think he was very unique because he was like extremely like advanced. But actually, I think his uniqueness was actually he was sort of like, I don't know, it was largely self-motivated. Yeah, like sure, he had a power, he definitely had a Shakti, but it was largely self-motivated. Like he's made a lot of powerful devotees. In fact, a lot of the devotees here in Australia, his disciples, and they're some of the best devotees actually. Sort of ironic, but I think there was a lot of personal motivation with those. And I was there that year that he passed away, and it seems to be quite inauspicious kind of when things happen to certain devotees. It doesn't seem like an auspicious kind of passing. There's a lot of controversy, and there's that whole thing about talking about child abuse as well. There was that Dallas school, and that was massively abused. That was his school, and then apparently, you had that whole thing of what's the bus program that was the Vishnu Jan Swami, and that was like massively preaching. And then all of a sudden, instead of doing that, I think it was again Tamal that introduced like selling the paraphernalia of paintings. And I was very opposed to that. When I was in the ashram, I started to question this idea that we were doing paraphernalia and collecting money. And actually, because I did all the website and all the newsletter, I started publishing this one on my own strength, and I called it Param Vijayate, and it was basically just to try and focus on the essence of what Sankirtan is, the Harinam, the chant of the holy name, the book distribution. And I got in major trouble. I ended up in the temperance office for 3 hours, sort of face to face, almost being threatened by saying, this is undermining, our determination. And I was, well, this is just the parampara, like it's just the basic philosophy. was just a newsletter saying, like, the importance of chanting the holy name and the book distribution, and then maybe extend that to Prasadam. But what I found was like the deviation was to take that name Sankirtan, because everyone was like, oh, go on, Sankirtan. And, they wouldn't even pronounce it right. Instead of being Sankirtan, it was like Sankirtan. It's like, go on Sankirtan, which kind of meant like going out making money, with stickers or buckets, whatever. And when I started to really see that was a deviation, it was very, very difficult. It was only me on my own strength trying to sort of in that temple, trying to turn it around and say that basically, no, we should be sticking to the essence here. Even Prabhupada in the time, they started distributing the records, and even the records had the mantra. Like, I've got a record collection here, I've got all those records. But even Prabhupada was so strict that he was like, no, people are not going to take these records seriously. Like, we've got to stick to our books. And so this is the point for me. Is like, it's always sticking to what's been given. Otherwise, you make a small change, and that becomes another change. And where does it end up? Ends up completely off the rails. So yeah. One question I was going to ask is I like how you chant. I've never changed my name. I quite often just go under my name, because this might be going out to people who are not that familiar, say, with Sanskrit names or the culture. But I've just got my name there, even though my initial name is Vijay Gauranga Das. But I was going to ask you, we haven't really quite touched on the point of this, how the Prabhupada should carry on. Prabhupada should be, the sort of sole initiating guru, and everyone else is like a representative. So would you consider your initiation, your name to be given to still stand, but in terms of that personality just sort of being a Ritvik representative, rather than having to, you don't need to reject that, or you don't reject the name, or because that's what some people told me, you can accept that as being, you don't accept that guru as being infallible, the all in all sort of infallible Acharya, that's Prabhupada. Prabhupada will never, be any less than that. But anyone else represented, no, they may represent it perfectly, or they may not. But in any case, when we've taken that initiation, those vows, we've got that name and that sort of identity. Does that mean we just carry on with that identity, whether we agree with the system that's sort of presently there, where they're actually the guru? And we think Prabhupada's the actual guru.
Okay. So I base myself in the transcendental Shabda of Srila Prabhupada and ground myself faithfully in that. And for me, the canonical conversation about this is the May 28th, 1977 conversation with the GBC, where they're specifically asking Srila Prabhupada about succession and continuation. And the second question that they asked, our next question, concerns how first and second initiations will be conducted in the future, particularly at that time that you're no longer with us. And Srila Prabhupada answers by saying, I will appoint some of you as officiating acharyas. And Tamal Krishna Swami says, is that Ritvik Acharya? And Srila Prabhupada says, Ritvik, yes. So Satswarup Das Goswami asks him, what is the relationship between the one who gives the initiation and the person who gets initiated? And Srila Prabhupada says, he is guru, he is guru. And Satswarup Goswami says, but he does it on your behalf. And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, that is formality, because in my presence you should not accept disciples, but on my behalf, on my order, Amara Agyaya Hoy. And Satswarup Das Goswami says, so they may also be considered your disciples. And Srila Prabhupada says, yes, why consider? Who? And then Tamal Krishna Goswami says, no, he's asking about the relationship between the person who gives the initiation and the person who gets initiated. And Srila Prabhupada says, he is guru. He is disciple, grand disciple, disciple of my disciple. And Tamal Krishna Goswami says, that's clear. And then they move on to our next question, and then Prabhupada cuts Satswarupa Goswami off and says, when I order, you become regular guru. He becomes disciple of my disciple. That's it. So this is the Shabda Brahman. And all correct reasoning proceeds from Shabda Brahman. This is Jiva Goswami's Sri Tattva Sandarbha Anuchad 9, Sarvasamvadini commentary on that Anuchad, correct reasoning, correct Anuman is rooted in Shabda. So anything that we reason about this situation must proceed from the Shabda Brahman of Srila Prabhupada. Then we are in the safe place. Just like in the battle between Gajendra, the elephant, and the crocodile wants to pull the elephant into the water, but the elephant needs to stay on the ground. So we ground ourselves in this transcendental Shabda Brahman. So having grounded myself in the transcendental Shabda of the Acharya, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, this is my reasoning from there. Srila Prabhupada creates a partnership with his disciples that he authorizes and empowers them to be officiating acharyas, also known as Ritvik or Ritvik Acharya. And the disciples that they initiate are their disciples, and they are also disciples directly of Srila Prabhupada. So they're both grand disciples, disciple of my disciple, and we are Srila Prabhupada's disciples. So I noticed when you were creating your question, you said, is he just a Ritvik Acharya? I would not say just, even for Ritvik Acharya itself. Ritvik Acharya is an exalted tattva created by Srila Prabhupada, where he directly empowers and authorizes his disciples to initiate on his behalf, on his order. And those disciples initiated become their disciples and also his disciples. And this is the structural authorization for our performance of Guru Puja to Srila Prabhupada, our Guru. We perform Guru Puja, it's not to Srila Prabhupada in the temple, in front of the deities. This is something that has been authorized by the Mahabhagavat devotee himself. And it's in direct contradiction to the Shastra, the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in chapter 8, where it says, one should not praise or eulogize anyone before the deity. And when Tripurari Swami asked Srila Prabhupada about this, said, we do this Guru Puja in front of the deity, and it says in Nectar of Devotion that one should not praise or eulogize anyone before the deity. Srila Prabhupada replied by saying, dilemma. So he acknowledged that this is a practice that, when you examine it, violates this Shastra conjunction, but it has the authorization of the Mahabhagavat. And whatever the empowered devotees of the Lord say is true. This is a verse in the 10th canto, 33rd chapter, verse 31, I believe, of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And so the Shabda Brahman of the Mahabhagavat, Dhammam tu Sakshat Bhagavat Pranitam. Dharma is that which is laid down by the Mahabhagavats. And so we worship Srila Prabhupada as our Guru because he is our Guru. We faithfully reproduce his Shabda in Parampara because he is our Guru. And his disciples, empowered and authorized by him to initiate on his order and on his behalf, are officiating acharyas empowered by him. We are also their disciples. So this is the Siddhanta that I have derived from studying the Shabda. And I said to my initiating guru, this is my realization from having dwelt in this conversation and meditated upon it. And after having performed Guru Puja daily to Srila Prabhupada for decades, that I ask myself the question, who am I? And the answer is that I am your disciple. And I am also the disciple of Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. This is the statement of the Acharya. And in this Siddhanta, my heart finds peace. And he wrote back to me and he said, I'm honored to be a tiny link to his divine grace.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So no problem there, really.
So I wouldn't, and I wouldn't say just a Ritvik Acharya. There's no just about that. It is like a glorious, empowered tattva. And also, the relationship with the initiating guru is that my experience of it, like the contribution to my life. There, earlier you said about like defying the order. My initiating guru never said to me, don't chant Hare Krishna in the protest. He never said that. I was in communication with him while I was there. I was saying, hey, this is what we're doing. He didn't say anything to me. So, I think of myself in some senses as being a deniable asset. And then because my initiating guru is also a GBC in this country. And then, statements came out from the GBC saying, signed by the GBC, the National Council, ISKCON National Council, saying devotees can't do Harinam and protests. And so some devotees were criticizing, this, that, and the other thing. I said, one thing to understand is that if you glorify my actions and activity, and I'm just simply an instrument of the Lord and the parampara, in the protests of chanting the holy name, you should understand also that I'm a product, just like you were saying about Tamal Krishna Goswami. So many of the devotees in Australia are his initiated disciples, and they're also some of the most fixed up devotees. So, all of these things are there, and we have to use tattva vivek, discrimination, to understand. And, there's as much of an art to this as there is a science. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah. It seems to be like kind of quite a subtle point, like like you're Ritvik Acharya, you become their disciple, but we're also disciples of Prabhupada. Like in a sense, they're empowered by Srila Prabhupada. They have no quality independent of Srila Prabhupada. They're simply empowered by Srila Prabhupada. And oftentimes they are directly initiated by Prabhupada, and they can initiate us. So it seems to be kind of quite a subtle point. Like we've taken initiation from these people who a lot of people may consider, gurus in an absolute right. But obviously, like you say, your initiate guru feels honored to be just a link in the chain. And
why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Like if you didn't, that's a rejection of the parampara.
Yeah.
And one thing just there that you said that they don't have any potency other than the authorization of Prabhupada. They have the potency that they have, and they have the authorization and empowerment of Prabhupada.
And I'm not saying they don't have any potency. I mean, apart from what Srila Prabhupada's given them,
in addition to.
In addition to.
Yeah, and the problem arises when they pretend that they don't have the authorization and empowerment of Prabhupada, and then start saying crazy things like Prabhupada's a conditioned soul and we can correct him. It's like, if your spiritual master is a conditioned soul and you can correct him from below, then what do you want me to do? Follow your example? You're a conditioned soul and I will correct you from below. Not because that is the etiquette or that is the philosophy, but that is, you have created that you are a conditioned soul and that you correct your guru from below. So now you will experience it yourself. You're a deviant.
Yeah. Because one time I think I was talking to Mr. Kavachi, like the deity worship minister, and the point came up of like, when you on the altar, you got the parampara, ending with Prabhupada, and then if you've got your like initiating Diksha Guru, a picture, then that picture has to go in like a lower, to go on the stand, on the artist stand or on the table below. And he was basically saying that was, that's like a law, that's like a GBC or an ISKCON law that these gurus don't go on the same, like there may be, initiating guru, there may be Ritvik Guru, there may be, the initiating gurus present now, but they still can't go on that level. And I said to Sima Kavachi, what if someone considered their initiating guru to be like a Nityasiddha? And he says, well, it doesn't matter what, whether they consider Nityasiddha, the fact is they can't go on the same level as Prabhupada and the rest of the Parampara. So in a sense, they're already sort of showing, in a sense, what you're talking about is them being representatives. They are just, whether you call it Ritvik representative, whatever, but in a sense, like what we've already got in ISKCON is got that. You've got the Parampara who we consider like Nityasiddhas, and then we've got initiating gurus who may or may not, maintain, like some people fall from that position, some people don't. But in any case, they can't be considered on the same level. So I thought it's kind of an interesting point, really. Like, I've never rejected my initiating spiritual master, but there's sometimes other people have put question marks over the heads of these people, and I'm sort of like there scratching my head thinking, like, you don't want to deny it. You don't want to, you don't want to just be like in a closet. You want to acknowledge these things, certain things which like a sannyasi wouldn't do. There's been a lot of sort of launch of attack on my initiating guru. Like, he's often holding the hands of like, young girls and things like that. And so it's sort of, I brought it up recently with a god brother, and he just kind of ignored the comment. I didn't want to make any offense, but I was just sort of pointing out that sometimes people say that this is not the etiquette for a sannyasi, initiating guru, to be doing these things. Now, of course, someone might say, well, who are we to judge from our point of view? But then again, like, there's a certain etiquette, like, even like Chaitanya was very strict, wasn't he, when he was sannyas? Had that thing with Junior Haridas, and he banished him, even for just looking. Of course, what to speak of us, we have all sorts of problems with lust and things, but when someone's in a position of like initiating guru and they're sannyasi, and then they start to, it seems like, there's a bit of a, what do you call it? Like, I don't know. It seems to be a deviation in, like, in the etiquette of a sannyasi.
I'll point out one contradiction that reveals something. And that is that, as you say, like, someone can say, well, who are you to judge from your position?
Mm.
But then at the same time, you're told that in order to, that the GBC cannot guarantee that any of the ISKCON initiating gurus is a bona fide guru, and it is the responsibility of the prospective disciple to evaluate the initiating guru to find out whether they are or not. So in other words, the idea is that you have to read all of Prabhupada's books and then master everything to the level where you can tell who's like the real deal. And then, what makes them the bona fide spiritual master is, in fact, your evaluation of them. Like, in other words, simultaneously, you're told that you can't judge, but then on the other side, it's like the only way that they're authorized is based on your voluntary concession or creation of them as like, oh, they're the real deal. So that if something happens in the future and then they deviate and become an atheist and denounce Prabhupada and ISKCON, then they're like, well, that's on you because, it was your responsibility to make sure that they were a Nitya Siddha. Mm. Additionally, I would say that if you are that your guru is a Nitya Siddha, then you would also be that Srila Prabhupada is my Param Guru, and you would do Guru Puja to the Nitya Siddha every day. That would seem to make sense. It's kind of, to me, manipulative and dishonest to have Srila Prabhupada accept the Guru Puja every day, use Srila Prabhupada's books, and then be like, and I'm also a Nitya Siddha. It's like, Srila Prabhupada didn't do that. He didn't have his disciples worship his spiritual master to take the karma. He took the Guru Puja directly himself, passed it up the parampara. He produced the scriptures. He didn't have them studying his spiritual master's books. So, ISKCON are the ISKCON initiating gurus are Srila Prabhupada's officiating acharyas. They are the Ritviks. And the redefinition of that word, like you said at one point there, well, you can call it a Ritvik or whatever you want. But no, Srila Prabhupada says, I will appoint some of you as officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna says, is that Ritvik Acharya? Srila Prabhupada says, yes, Ritvik. I do not call them Ritviks. Srila Prabhupada calls them Ritviks. That is the authorized meaning of the term as we receive it in disciplic succession. And one of the yaksha linguistic spells that is cast over this conversation is the redefinition of the term Ritvik, from the pure transcendental shabda of Srila Prabhupada with its authorized meaning, editing that word of the Acharya and overwriting and erasing the original meaning, and then making it mean something else, so that people will say to me, oh, are you a Ritvik now, Sitapati? And I say, no, I am not an officiating Acharya who initiates on behalf and on the order of Srila Prabhupada. But they are using the word to mean something else. Now, here's the thing. If you can't even form the same sentences that Srila Prabhupada did when he gave these instructions, how do you expect to be able to understand what he said and to faithfully reproduce his sound vibration? They are reproducing Shabda in Parampara, not from Srila Prabhupada. Who is the person who authorized the redefinition of that word and its redeployment on top of Srila Prabhupada's Shabda to obscure and erase it. Who is that person?
A ghost.
A ghost. It's a ghost Siddhanta haunting the conversation. It is unhinged, all of the speaking from the pure Shabda of Srila Prabhupada, and correct Anuman proceeds from Shabda Brahman. So all reasoning, all thinking, all explanation, all conversation that proceeds from Shabda, where the word Ritvik has been erased, Srila Prabhupada's Shabda, and replaced with another shadow word, can never arrive at a correct Siddhanta. No correct understanding can ever come from such incoherent speech.
Now we already having like this ism added to it. Devotees are talking about like, oh, you know, the Ritvik ism. Like there is no such a thing in the scriptures as a ism, but it's people adding all to that word. And they're not even understanding that. So we have to be extremely careful of what we say. Srila Prabhupada said is Ritvik. And there's no ism in there.
Yeah.
It's very clear. We can't argue about it.
Yeah. There's a regulation called isms and schisms. So that's what it does. As soon as you add an ism to it, it's like that's what people say. They see it as a schism or like a splinter group, don't they? Like some people might like see you, Sitapati, it's like you've kind of left. It's kind of like you've kind of joined the splinter group, and it's like, no, you wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't agree with that. Like,
I'm just doing philosophy according to the books.
yeah.
Let's follow Srila Prabhupada's instruction and apply the teachings. Yeah.
No, they're creating a new philosophy now. They're making up a philosophy now with their argument.
I can say something to that. Like what's happening here is that if we take the pure transcendental Shabda of Srila Prabhupada and ground ourselves in that, when people are saying, oh, those filthy Ritviks or Ritvik is a concoction, they are directly attacking Srila Prabhupada. Because when you say Ritvik is a concoction, Ritvik is a creation of Srila Prabhupada in response to the question of how first and second initiations will be conducted in the future, particularly at that time that you're no longer with us. I will appoint some of you as officiating acharyas. Tamal Krishna Goswami, is that Ritvik Acharya? Srila Prabhupada, yes, Ritvik. When you start like using the word Ritvik and like having an emotional, like disgust and word, it's directed at the Acharya himself. And so what's happened is the so-called Ritvikism. So this point, Hare Krishna, this point is completely invisible unless you make this first move. And that is, I categorically reject the redefinition of the word Ritvik away from the transcendental Shabda Brahman of the Acharya and its redefinition to mean something else by an unknown, unauthorized person. I reject the editing of the words of the Acharya. Now, when you make that move and you suddenly start to see people saying all these things that are incoherent, like a ghostly haunted person. So now the only comment I leave on anything when people are talking about it, I just say, the word Ritvik means an officiating Acharya who initiates on behalf and on the order of Srila Prabhupada. This is the authorized meaning in disciplic succession. Any other use of the term with a different meaning is not faithful to Parampara. Thank you. And that's it. Because until you can get that one thing, no meaningful sense can be made. No reasoning that proceeds from that contaminated Shabda can ever produce Siddhanta. Once you do that move and deal with everything in your head and everything in the conversation around you from that faithful grounding in Srila Prabhupada's Shabda, what becomes apparent is that Ritvikism doesn't exist. There are two half-hen philosophies that you're presented with. You can either accept this, they are only Srila Prabhupada's disciples and not the disciple of the officiating Acharya. Or they are only the disciple of the officiating Acharya and not the disciple of Srila Prabhupada. Can you see how that's a false dichotomy, and neither of those accurately represents what Srila Prabhupada creates in the conversation? So you've been presented with like what we might call a Hegelian dialectic, which excludes and obscures the actual tattva created by Srila Prabhupada in that moment. And all the attacks on like the Ritviks, when you are saying these words and saying them that way, they're a form of guru aparad. They're a form of offense against his divine grace. He created for the future of the movement this glorious tattva where he empowers and authorizes his disciples to initiate on his order and on his behalf. And those disciples become their disciples and his disciple. He is the Maha Bhagavat. His speaking perfectly describes and creates reality. It is Shabda Brahman. Dhammam tu sakshad Bhagavat pranitam. Dharma consists of those laws laid down by the Bhagavat. And that is erased completely. And you are given two choices, neither of which is what Srila Prabhupada created.
Good point.
It appears there is a lot of struggles from the not only from the Hare Krishna population or devotees, is from this group of, let's call it swamis or sages, that for some reason or another, they want to eliminate yet give the pranams to Srila Prabhupada. It's like a piggybacking, thinking by their own power and potency, they can lift up the amount of devotees that need God. They think that. But they don't know the fact that they are saying the pranams to Srila Prabhupada is the only reason that they are where they are, and devotees are still carrying out with their faith in Krishna consciousness. Because they may have some potency for sure, they do, but it's not enough to withhold, carry all of the sinful activities, past karmas, all of those devotees. And you can see already, some of them already bloop, they continue to bloop. After serving maybe 30 years, 40 years, or whatever years. Now, you know, the last Swami that bloop was 82 years of age.
Well, he didn't bloop. Blooping means that they basically go back to the material energy and effectively renounce, or at least renounce and sometimes even denounce Krishna consciousness.
In a way that you accept, well, for me, it's you got yourself caught by the illusion, you know, sleeping with a woman after so many years of like dedicating yourself. Like, did you think that you have the potency to counteract the illusion, the power of Maya? We have to be real here. We have no power unless we are highly attached, connected, like begging for the protection of Shri Krishna. Because the potency of Shri Krishna is Maya Devi. It's very simple to understand. And the potency of Maya Devi is bewildering. And it says in the scriptures, it's mind-blowingly bewildering. That a gentleman that has been, you know, giving his life, his service to Srila Prabhupada or the mission, and then he just got like bewildered by a female. What is that example that doesn't make people understand you are not in control? We are nothing without the protection of Srila Prabhupada, without the mercy of Srila Prabhupada, who is basically the our acharya, our spiritual master that is taking us back to Godhead. That's what he said. He came here to take us back to Godhead. And that is his only mission. And he asked us directly, please don't make me come back here. And this place is horrendous. Look at it right now. People with their egos high up, they cannot even catch themselves. Provoking, killing children. Look, let's be real. These things are happening in front of our eyes. And we are just in self-denial here that the Maya Devi is not potent, that you are potent. It's ridiculous to think that. That's why we gotta be respectful to our spiritual master, our Acharya, Srila Prabhupada. We cannot call him any individual. We cannot diminish him saying like, oh yeah, you know what? He was from he has some influence from the Victorian era. That's why he says about woman about this and woman about that, or justification of every single word he said. He is so real. He's so truthful about things. Maya Devi is so potent.
Yeah, I'm going to bring up a couple of points. Yeah, one is that, we're not, like, Prabhupada has proven himself to be infallible. He lived his life absolutely impeccably. You can see that, he's not a conditioned soul. Whereas everyone else that may represent him, even if they are empowered, even if they are, do have some potency. Yeah, independent of Srila Prabhupada. Whether you can put full faith in, it seems like we're supposed to put full faith in these, these officiant acharyas. Rather, because at one point I flip-flopped on this issue over years and years, but probably like even 10, 15 years ago, if I do my dandavats, I'd do the pranam mantra of my initiating guru, but I'd always follow it with Srila Prabhupada's, and then sometimes I would just do Prabhupada's one, but now I tend to try and do both, or acknowledge the fact that, Prabhupada is the main, he's the main driving force behind my faith. Where I can't say in absolute terms that I have absolute faith in my initiating guru, as if to say that, there's never any discrepancy, or, there's no ability that, he could slip from that position. So I tend to do both. I'll acknowledge him through his pranam mantra, but then I'll also do Prabhupada's pranam mantra. And I've been doing that for a long time, because I realized that I cannot put my whole complete faith in someone which, who already has some kind of like question mark over the head. What to speak of some of the people who literally, like you said, bloop. To me, yeah, bloop means completely go, but some people don't bloop, but they definitely disqualify themselves from being a guru, because, by falling from the process. I mean, I've fallen from the process, but I've never ever put myself on a pedestal. I'd be extremely reluctant to ever put myself on a position where I'm a guru. I don't think I could ever do it. But it seems like some of these people, they put themselves on the position, or Prabhupada recommended certain people, and even Prabhupada said, didn't he? Like, he said most of you actually fall. He realized that. He said there's an emergent situation. I'm giving sannyas to people in the 20s, and he says most of you will fall down. This mind is very strong. And he said it was sort of almost an emergent situation. And then he actually stopped sannyas, didn't he? Like now it's always a big thing. Like, people will want to take sannyas, and maybe just for like an ego. I'm the next sannyasi, whatever, and you get the worship. But actually, Prabhupada stopped sannyas, didn't he, at one point? And like sort of no more sannyasi. So it becomes interesting.
He did, but he also gave sannyas after that.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah, so he did both.
Black and white, but yeah, I'm not saying there shouldn't be any sannyasis, but it's definitely a high position. Actually, when I joined, I like your Diksha Guru, Devan Riduswami, I went to his home program. I read his book, Perfect Escape. I was blown away. And then Jivananda invited me to his home program. Jivananda was he wasn't initiated then, it was back to John, and he was serving Maharaj. And he invited me to a home program. That really blew me away. And actually, I read that book 4 times. I just read it I've never done that with a book. Well, maybe with the Gita now, but that book I'd read 4 times over and over. And then I told him actually when I joined, and it was quite amazing. And then I actually read it a 5th time, and I could happily read it again. And I was thinking, like, you know, all these sannyasis were coming. I was thinking, who's my guru? Who's my guru? And then after a couple of years, I was like really kind of distraught, and no one was really telling me. I was just thinking, oh, I'm going to try and figure this out with the knowledge I've got. And I was thinking, one time he came and I was like quite distraught. He left, and I said, oh, I think he's my guru, and I think I should have approached him. And then I think I spoke to someone, and they said, oh no, he's not an initiated guru. This would have been about maybe 1999 or something. And I was like, oh, why? And then, like, I'd never been told, and I never looked up till later on when, you know, all these things. So you said these things were on the internet earlier on, and I guess I hadn't really seen, but yeah. And then the whole thing about New Vrindavan had to be kind of explained to me, I suppose. And then, you know, and then it was actually shortly after that that was all sort of cleared, and then they became initiated gurus. But that, you know, at that time I was like, okay, well, he's not initiated guru, maybe someone else is. And then, yeah, I sort of gravitated towards Vijay Swami. I was taking a lot of shiksha also from David Swami, and it was, you know, it was kind of quite powerful, quite cutting sometimes. I probably needed the slap, you know, of reality. But in any case, it was difficult because I was sort of like, oh, what's going on here? Like, you know, you've got these controversies, you've got like the whole New Vrindavan kind of thing, and all sorts of, you know, discrepancies in ISKCON. Like, you know, at first you join, you kind of, you know, wet behind the ears, you just sort of think everything's like fine and dandy, and then you uncover the kind of pretty horrible history of some of the child abuse, this and that and the other. And of course now it's pretty lot easier, you know, like now you've got social media and the internet and everything. All these things didn't, well, the internet was coming in, but like now it's just so easy to see. I watched that documentary. I've seen the one, the Holy Cow Swami by New Vrindavan. That was a more recent one. And then interesting, the more recent one interviews certain people in ISKCON, like Ridan, I know I was just commenting on there, but I've noticed actually that some of the people involved there, I don't know if they declined to comment, but they're just admitted that they're not commenting, which is unusual. Like Radhanath Swami was there, Devanath Swami was there. So again, it puts like a question mark over my name, that people like to put themselves on this sort of almost like a pedestal and be worshipped, but they don't seem to humbly acknowledge that, you know, once upon a time I was involved. You know,
I'm fallible.
Yeah, it's basically saying my father was like, you know, I'm not saying that, like, you know, like your guru has any real discrepancy over him now. I certainly can't judge from my point of view, but definitely if there was an acknowledgement of, yeah, you know, this is where we once were, and this is how things start to go wrong. And that, but this, like, if you read, say, if you read The Journey Home, you know, by Radhanath Swami, like this complete omission of anything to do with New Vrindavan. Like, how can you do a biography? It's something you were massively involved in. You know, you just completely sweep it aside. And so these feel like red flags for me. You know, I wouldn't consider these people, you know, infallible, you know, in any case. But I think if they were humble enough to say, look, yes, I was involved in this, and I admit, you know, we got deviated, and let's make sure that, you know, that doesn't happen again. And it seems like it can just happen again, you know, because that whole thing was Kirtananda, like he was on the massive pedestal. He almost like acted like Prabhupada, didn't like he even had like a cane, didn't he? Like he started really acting like he was totally the next Acharya. He wanted to be the next one in charge, sort of, you know, and he was probably one of the earliest disciples, whatever. But a lot of it was self-aggrandizement, and that was horrendous. That history of like New Vrindavan, and like I was listening to the wisdom of the sages and like, or things like that, and they'll bring up like New Vrindavan, and it's like, but they're not actually acknowledging it. That's why I want to do like a podcast where we're not shying away from, you know, these sort of topics. You know, we don't have to delve into them like the fly on the stool, but we also don't want to gloss over and just think, no, everything's fine and dandy. There has to be like a bit of a reality.
Yeah. I've spent many decades meditating on this. And, you know, my first wife, we were married for 24 years. She was at New Vrindavan. She was a disciple of Kirtanananda Swami.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, so I spent a lot of time looking into this, analyzing it. And from the perspective of like, it's very easy to look back through history and look at it from a distance and go, oh, it's so obviously a deviation. But I wanted to know the answer to the question, like, what did it look like to be inside that while it was happening? Because obviously the situation must for the people who were there and, went through the thing, it must have looked a certain way. Obviously, there were some people who were like, I'm out and left. But for the people who didn't, like, what did it look like? Because I wanted to know. And, the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, it says one should not praise or criticize the activities or qualities of the living entities, because by doing so, one becomes deviated from one's own self-interest. I will say this, that it appears to me that, as you've pointed out, it's a great missing that the devotees who were there, such as Devamarita Swami and Radhanath Swami, are not giving classes whose substance consists of the senior leader that I was following deviated, and I did not detect it. I went along with it or whatever. But like, here's the lesson that I learned from that. And here's what you can do to be responsible as a disciple and as a follower for holding your leaders accountable and supporting them and protecting them from deviation. Because one thing about that is that, it's like he deviated and those around him didn't sufficiently challenge that or, deal with it in such a way that they were able to impact that. And, it's like, maybe it's not possible, it's Krishna's will, etc. But I would like to hear something like, yeah, I followed someone and he deviated, and here's how you can tell if I'm deviating, and here's what you should do. And this is the lesson that I learned from being in that situation. Like, that's a powerful lesson to be teaching people. Now, I've never heard those classes, and so I kind of constructed it for myself by speaking with my first wife who was present there to see what does it look like. And so, when COVID came around, I was like, we're doing the thing and we're going to keep doing the thing. And we're just, ignore all further orders from headquarters until we know who's in control of the radio, because like endorsements, you were sharing about your sign that you created on the marches that you went on. One devotee brought a sign and put it in front of the tent where we were doing continuous kirtan in the occupation, and it said, "We follow Dharma, not Big Pharma." So, it's like, hey, man, your senior leader can deviate. Your officiating acharya can deviate. But, like, you should be intelligent enough that you don't deviate along with them. You stay true to Srila Prabhupada and his teachings.
And as a disciples, this is, when you're talking, honey, this is the thing that I would like to openly suggest the community of the devotees. We heard different statements, letters, Facebook pages of people that were in the mission or in the schools and how much they suffer. And also we see many people that were basically silent, complicit or silent, which are actually complicit. We as people, we have the power to go up. As devotees, we have the duty to stand up, to protect, be responsible, and be accountable. Let's put it that way. Where we are responsible of not allowing our acharya or
you mean Srila Prabhupada?
No. The
initiating
gurus to fall down.
Oh, Srila Prabhupada called them officiating acharyas, Ritviks, or Ritvik acharyas. Yeah.
Officiating acharyas. Let's put it. Yeah, let's use that word.
Let's use Prabhupada's term.
Yeah, officiating acharyas to fall down.
Yes, we have to protect them.
We have the power to do so because we don't want them to fall down. We don't want them to create more pain to other people that are attached to them, a human being. So we have to be accountable for that. create an environment that actually provides them to be safe, where they are following their dharma, they're following their word to give that I gave and the fire sacrifice when they got initiated by Srila Prabhupada, and then when they say, yes, I'm going to be the officiating acharya. We need to do this. But if you leave them alone and you say, oh, he's the officiating acharya, he's the untouchable, he is the power, he's the God, and so, it's just like you're in a delusion, because that person is a human being. He's getting his strength through his journey, through his attachment to Krishna and to loyalty, faithfulness, dedication to Srila Prabhupada. In that way, the officiating acharya won't fall, because he will be protected by his own disciples. And the effects of that is we want to have like the organization of Srila Prabhupada, the institution that Srila Prabhupada created, like being diminished, being tainted, and being seen as just another cult. Because he didn't create another cult that somebody else can criticize and overstep and insult. It's something different than anybody else in this world has created. It's completely different.
There are three things that have set fire to ISKCON now, and that will cause significant implosion. I mean, there's the ongoing, the editing of the books, that kind of stuff, the editing of the Acharya, ongoing offenses. But there have been three things in the last few years that have caused a significant fire. And this is just based on my observation over the last 25, 30 years and what's happened over the last 5 years. The first one is coming out and endorsing the COVID vaccines and suppressing the message of the Bhagavad during the pandemic. The second one is Nam Aparad, against the chanting of the holy name, by saying that at the wrong time in the wrong place, it causes inauspicious results, not having complete faith in the chanting of the holy name. And then the third one is that in 2020, a paper came out by Hridayananda Das Goswami called Understanding Prabhupada, it's a formal statement of a hermeneutic, an interpretive theory of understanding Srila Prabhupada's statements, that states that Srila Prabhupada is a conditioned soul, and that when he's reciting Shastra, it's Shabda Brahman. But in any other case, we can take it or leave it, because it's his Victorian, education conditioning, or he's a Bengali, whatever. So in other words, it's the Mayavad hermeneutic applied to the spiritual master. He has a material portion which can be discarded, and then there's a transcendental portion which is not actually him. It's the unmanifest beyond him. It's the Shastra and the Parampara, the previous acharyas. He's a nothing. He can be just tossed aside. He has no realization. He doesn't look at the world through Shastra Chakshus and generate new insight and new understanding, new authoritative methods. Even while doing Guru Puja to him in front of the deities in violation of the Shastra, it's like we're going to accept the things that are useful to us, but then we're going to just throw the rest aside. That paper and the failure of the officiating acharyas to challenge that and to leave that standing. In the Nectar of Devotion, it says that when one hears blasphemy of the acharya, it's also in the 4th canto of the Bhagavatam, one has to philosophically defeat that. One cannot let that stand, that statement, but the failure to stand up and challenge that is going to destroy everyone who does not challenge that.
And again, we're being permissive of it. And when we are permissive of people stomping on Srila Prabhupada and our acharya, our spiritual master, somebody else is going to come up. It's already happening. The person who is reading that paper, we already heard saying, oh, he's a conditioned soul. It's not only him saying in a paper. We already heard, my husband already heard, someone giving the lectures or home program saying Srila Prabhupada is a conditioned soul.
Wow. It just renders
It's a great sinister movement.
It's the disease now. The disease is spreading. The tumor is spreading.
Mm. It has to be cut out at the root, doesn't it? Yeah, because as soon as we start to accept that, then like the whole thing's completely, if we reject purpose, like I reject like material authorities a lot, but yeah, like we need some kind of authority. So, purpose, authority, and ultimately Krishna's authority. That's what keeps us, like we don't reject that, but anything that goes against that, then yeah, if it's not defeated, it's not rejected, then because the way I say it, there's like two deviations. Like there's the sensual deviation, which is quite easily to do, and it's more easy to rectify. But the philosophical deviation, it can be devastating. If someone goes into the sort of philosophical or Mayavad or any of that twist in the philosophy, it's very, very dangerous. And someone can be very intelligent doing that, like the person that you mentioned that's doing that. I used to listen to their classes probably more than anyone, and I really put them on a pedestal until I start to notice that, yeah, this idea of sort of like slowly sort of changing things. And actually, when I saw that personality the first time I'd ever seen him come to Sydney, and it was just up the road here in Newtown where I'm living, and there's a program, and after the end of the program, that person walked up, and I went and said, like, thank you. I've been listening to your lectures for like decades. And they just brushed me off, like, just sort of, and went to talk to like some young women. And I was like, that's it for me, bas. Like, I completely rejected that person as being like, on the pedestal anymore. Because I saw by the behavior, like, that was just like, that person should have like acknowledged, oh, that's very nice. I had some kind of, but like, I just felt rejected in favor of just some young women. So I was like, what, like a
Now you can tell the priority.
Huh?
Now you could tell the priority of the gentleman.
That's what I mean,
it was the woman.
And like that, because the Zonal Charizor had that title, and that they had the title of Charya Day, but a Charya means one who leads by example. But if you follow that example, then where are we going to end up? Following that example.
Yeah, I mean, look, Srila Prabhupada may be a conditioned soul. Maybe. I'm not some kind of fanatic. Like, maybe he is a conditioned soul. But if I find out that he is, I won't be pretending to be a devotee and initiating disciples and having them do Guru Puja to him. If that's my conclusion, it's like, at that point, it becomes the Guru grift. It becomes Srila Prabhupada's a conditioned soul, and he was just like getting it over on everyone and collecting up followers and money. And so I'm doing the same thing. I'm a conditioned soul too. It's like, okay, I know you're a conditioned soul because you admit it in this paper.
Yeah.
But what would be honest is if you accuse your spiritual master of being a conditioned soul, you lose all authoritativeness. You are now just a grifter, a manipulator, and it's Kaitava Dharma. So that statement, it's Mayavad, it converts everything into Kaitava Dharma. It's the end stage of usurpation of the seat of the Acharya. It's where Ananta Vasudeva ended up after he was placed in the seat of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur as the Acharya of the Gaudiya Math. He ended up at the end denouncing his spiritual master as a conditioned soul and a cheater and a grifter, and denouncing the Gaudiya Math and publicly apologizing for his participation in it. And this gentleman with his statement is like on that trajectory and very close to the end stage. And that devotees don't detect that and go, this is a serious philosophical deviation. He might be right. But if we're playing the game by the rules that Srila Prabhupada gave us, it's an illegal move. It takes you outside the tradition. You're outside the parampara at that point.
The other thing is, like, for this person to say he's a Srila Prabhupada is a conditioned soul, that automatically put this person like, are you the super soul? Are you the God here that knows everything? So which one are you? Are you the pretending God that you know everything, so therefore you can tell that he's a conditioned soul? Or you are not a conditioned soul trying to diminish Srila Prabhupada to put him under on your own level?
So we go. I don't usually use like historical analysis as a primary pramana. I stay grounded in the philosophy. But here's one thing that might be an interesting or illustrative insight. In the Zonal Acharya era, they pretended that they were as good as Prabhupada. Maha Bhagavats, Acharya Dev, Bhakti Pad, give me the Guru Puja, and then they started combusting because they do not have sufficient standing, purity, spiritual potency to independently channel that and transmit it back. They got Prabhupada's authorization and empowerment as his officiating acharyas, and they need to take shelter of that. And that's what they're doing in ISKCON today, while they're pretending that they're not doing it. So that was the first stage, zonal acharya. The new stage, the next stage is, first we pretended that we were as good as Prabhupada. Now we pretend that Prabhupada is as good as us. We pretended before that we were Maha Bhagavat Uttama Adhikaris. Now we pretend that Prabhupada's a conditioned soul, grifting the public.
Yeah.
It's just the flip side of the grift.
Yeah, good point. I was also thinking like a lot more was probably said about it, but all those conversations went missing. Like Hare Krishna was in charge of the tapes, and I think it was the 150 conversations or up to 200 conversations went missing. And I saw a statement by some other devotee recently, I think it was a Prabhupada disciple, and he was basically saying that Tamal wanted to destroy or burn a certain amount of, but in any case, like there's a massive amount of conversations, which were sacred conversations. Everything was like made sure to be recorded. And then in that crucial time towards the end, when the continuation was sort of being discussed, obviously it seems pretty like a red flag to me that one person who wants to like be almost like the next guru in charge of the tapes, like suddenly managed. It's a bit like when NASA like supposedly accidentally
Lost all the footage.
Lost all the footage. Like you lose all the footage of like the greatest like achievement of mankind. It's a bit like the same thing. Like you lose the crucial conversations towards the end of Prabhupada's life. When the idea that this succession, the Prabhupada was going to continue, that is a huge red flag for me.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot which is said probably there.
Yeah, so that number of 150 to 200, that's derived through Anuman, logical reasoning, based on statistical analysis of how many tapes there usually are for different periods. And they're like, well, there should have been this many tapes in that period if it matches everything else. The crucial moment, the last, pastimes and instructions. Gauri Das Pandit Das, there's a video from 1990, a debate between Jayadvaita Swami, Ravindra Swarup, and on the other side were, I can't remember who the guys are on the other side, but Gauri Das Pandit Das is put up. And he says, I heard Srila Prabhupada talking about his Ritvik system in a conversation in Vrindavan, and I pressed play on the tape recorder. And the tape of that conversation is not in the archives. In that conversation on May 28, 1977, it's a formal structured interview. And we could take the case that it was structured in such a way to provide the sound bites needed to support, whatever they want in the future. That would be a conjecture. But one thing that seems apparent from that is that when Srila Prabhupada says, I will appoint some of you as officiating acharyas, and Tamal Krishna says, is that Ritvik acharya? This is an indication, the introduction of a term spontaneously in the conversation that we have not heard before anywhere else. It's not found in Prabhupada's books. The word Ritvik and acharya together appear in the 8th canto, but it's describing the priests and the acharyas. So for Tamal Krishna to spontaneously put that word forward and then for Srila Prabhupada to say, yes, Ritvik, indicates that Tamal Krishna has heard that term from Srila Prabhupada in previous conversations on this very topic.
Yeah.
So,
he knew about it.
The July 9th letter, which is sent out, where's the tapes with the conversations around that, leading up to that? If you have a look at the July 9, July 8 days, you don't find the discussion of these momentous continuation and succession actions that are taking place. You find only this one sparse conversation, this one focused, narrowly focused interview with these questions. You don't find, and like you say, there are huge gaps in so, the implication or the inference from that is that a lot of the transcendental shabd of his divine grace in this matter is not available to us because the tapes that contain that are not in the archive.
And this is a good point. It's a self-telling. You don't mention something that you don't know because you don't know.
Mm.
You mean about
The
Hare
Rig,
Krishna,
yeah,
Rig
Rig.
Acharya?
Yeah.
Mm.
If you don't know, you don't know. It's simple, right? But he's saying, he's asking, is it Rigvik
Acharya.
Acharya? So he knew that from Srila Prabhupada, because Srila Prabhupada is not a person that just brings us things out of the blue and then this is what you need to accept. He's a person, he explains and repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats for everybody to get it in the head. Repetition. You know, human beings needs more than 100 times repetition to actually get it. That's the scientific thing that they come out with that
We've got
statement.
2 minutes left in this thing.
Anyways, so this
Gonna
is
do
like
another one, or
we
you want to
have
wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up. I think we've
Yeah.
really, there's
Yeah,
so
come
much more
on.
we could do. We could do another
Yeah.
episode if people are interested in this one. We could
Yeah.
talk about the poison hypothesis. That's another
Yeah,
one that we haven't touched on.
we go on
yeah,
and
so
on,
there
but
is a very common thing for us to think about it. You don't know something that you don't know. And then why does he ask specific about this?
Because he knows about
He
it.
knows about it.
And he heard it from Srila Prabhupada. That's
What
the
else?
logical inference.
Mm.
Anyways,
Mm.
okay, so anything else you want to say?
Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Shri Prabhupada. All glories. Thank
Yeah.
you so much for your time, both of you. Yeah, I think you can definitely talk about more topics. It can go on and on this, but I think that's enough for this session. We'll see
Today.
what responses and that night. Yeah, we'll be discussing again then. Be a pleasure, but it's been really nice. Yeah. Really,
Thank you for inviting us, Prabhu. I really appreciate
No, I
it.
really look up to you, both of you, and yeah, it's helped me a lot
Thank
to just have the association and yeah, talk about these sort of topics. Hopefully other people really benefit. Yeah.
One should not shy away from such controversial topics because by doing so, they strengthen the mind and one becomes more attached to Sri Krishna.
Yeah. Well, it says that Upanishad, doesn't it? One who understands the transcendental nature and nescience side by side.
Yes.
Pave the way to liberation. So yeah, we don't necessarily shy away from it. So yeah, we see it both in context. Yeah.
Param Vijayate Sri Krishna Sankirtanam.
Enjoy. Haribol, Hare Krishna.
Jai Shri
Jai
Krishna.
Hare
care.
Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thanks.
Haribol.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Soulforce Revolution.